and welcome to Not Our Business podcast, where it's not our business, but we're going to talk about it.
This is a podcast exploring and discussing true crime, conspiracy theories, the unexplained, and whatever rabbit hole we find next.
I'm Sydney.
I'm Kate.
And every disappearance leaves behind so many questions. Some are answered and some are left unanswered. Chance Englebert was a young husband, father, and a son who disappeared after an argument with his wife on a hot summer night in 2019. Today, we're exploring the timeline, investigation, and the unanswered questions surrounding his disappearance.
If you are local to Western South Dakota, Nebraska area, chances are you might be a little bit familiar with this case. But Chance Englebert was a 25-year-old husband, new father to an infant baby named Banks. He was competitive in rodeo as a bareback rider, and he originally lived in Edgemont, South Dakota, then later moved to Wyoming. The night that Chance went missing was July 6th of 2019. Him and his wife, Bailey, were visiting Gering, Nebraska. They were visiting family over the 4th of July weekend, and earlier in the day, he had spent time golfing with some family members. However, there were reports that there was some tension and an argument made with the family that he was golfing with. Yes, the details and the severity of the argument of the disagreement have been debated over the years. So I don't really know the details of that argument, but that did transpire during the day before his disappearance.
Got it. And does it say who specifically he was out golfing with?
I do believe that they were visiting Bailey's family, so I believe it was people within Bailey's realm or her family.
Got it. Okay.
And later that evening, Chance left his wife's grandparents' home on foot after having another argument.
Okay.
Later reports, Bailey has spoken a little bit about the case since. She did note in an interview that this wasn't necessarily uncommon for Chance to leave after an argument and walk and cool off a little bit.
Right.
But that was one of the first events that happened that evening. He was then later seen on surveillance footage walking through the Gering area. He was spotted at a business purchasing some items. I think it was like a convenience store at a gas station, walking through on foot in that area. That
Gotcha.
was the last known sighting of Chance alive.
Wow.
Later that evening, his phone did send like an unusual final message containing numbers and emojis that family members said was unlike him. I'm not sure if that was sent to Bailey or who that was sent to, but there was a message coming from his phone later that evening. However, after that message, he never returned, and this is where the extensive searches began.
So he disappeared on July 6th. When and who reports missing?
So the next morning, Bailey actually called the police and filed a missing persons report.
Okay.
With that report, all of the search began. There were multiple law enforcement agencies that were brought in to conduct these searches. They had service dogs. They were flying drones in the area. There were volunteers on horseback. And to just kind of paint the picture of the terrain, if you think of the Badlands of South Dakota, that's kind of what this area is like. It's not necessarily deserty, but it's pretty desolate.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of nooks and crannies in those kinds of, what are they called? Buttes? Buttes?
Oh, yes.
So, like Eagle Butte?
Yes, and lots of cliffs. So if you're walking around in the dark, it can be very unsafe in that type of terrain.
We were over by the Badlands the other day, and I mean, they've got fences. So, like, people, don't go over because you could get lost and you can die.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that's in some places, but I imagine there's a lot of places where be careful. There were many volunteers going through on horseback and on foot conducting these searches. They were searching waterways, all of the surrounding areas around Gering. At this time, hundreds of tips started coming in. The case was actually starting to gain national attention. And at this point, a reward was put in place for any information that would lead to any sort of answers in the case. Because Chance was last seen walking on foot and then seemingly disappeared, many theories at this point started circulating. Why would he walk so far away from town? Because he wasn't found in any of the surrounding vicinity. How did nobody find him despite the huge searches? And what was the deal with the strange message that he had sent, I believe, to Bailey?
Was there any alcohol, drugs involved?
There were no official statements from police that alcohol was a factor.
I'm just thinking like cowboy kind of guy. There's a fight. It's 4th of July.
You could probably connect the dots if he was the drinking type. I know when I'm golfing, I'll probably have a cocktail.
If
Or
I
two.
drink, that would be what I would be doing golfing because I'm not golfing.
So with the speculation, could somebody else be involved? Was he picked up? What happened? All of the theories were kind of starting to go wild.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, online speculation also started pointing to Bailey, his wife,
Mm-hmm.
because the argument before he went missing. Authorities have not come out and linked Bailey. There's no evidence proving that anyone close to him harmed him. Investigators had said that there was no confirmed evidence of foul play during much of the search at this point in time in his disappearance. Fast forward, that was 2019. Years have gone by. In October of 2025, hikers discovered human remains near Scotts Bluff National Monument. Again, picture the Badlands of South Dakota. That is what the terrain of this national monument would be like.
Is that in Nebraska, Scottsbluff?
Yes.
Okay.
Not far from where Chance was last seen. So DNA testing was done, and it was confirmed that the remains did belong to Chance, and some of his belongings were found nearby where the remains were.
So how were the remains? I'm assuming they were pretty decomposed at the time.
Yes, I remember looking up photos of this area. Authorities, they did determine that the death was accidental,
Mm-hmm.
that he had died from a fall because of the rugged terrain within the Scotts Bluff National Monument. And then the reports actually indicate he fell from a significant height. So within thinking about that cliff area off of one of those buttes, it looked like that's probably where he was located. He was in a spot where hikers in the area, they were able to spot something suspicious within the terrain.
So if they were hikers, was this a common trail? Was it on the trail? So why were they the first ones to see it, I guess would be my question.
It wasn't necessarily on the trail, but this monument is pretty well known for tourists hiking through the area. There are a lot of trails.
I lived in Nebraska. Like, I've been there. I mean, it's a pretty extensive place.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to the monument before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why the case is still to this day kind of debated, even though there was a determination from the investigation that was completed that there was no foul play, no family was involved, and this was an accident. There's still a lot of questions that are unanswered at this point. People close to Chance and people that have been following the case, they think the location where he was found was very surprising because of the search that was done, the amount of people that were casing that area. They had the search dogs go all throughout that same area.
Mm-hmm.
It does ask questions. Why did it take so long? And what about his remains flagged these hikers?
Well, I think that anytime you're in a space like that, when we look at national park missing people and then they are found and they're found nowhere near or anything like that, 2019 to 2025, I mean, it's a lot of years for weather, for animals, just natural things to occur. So I'm not saying that it can happen, but I mean, there's a lot of, different variables that can occur throughout the years in nature.
You can probably speak to it a little bit better as far as the weather in that area. If it's similar to here, the winters can be pretty brutal. The summers are extremely hot.
Yes.
It's extreme weather either way. I imagine it's very similar because it's not terribly far from western South Dakota.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. You're on prairie a lot of times. I mean, so the wind, you don't really have anything blocking the wind. It's not like you have a major city with skyscrapers or anything. So that wind is coming through. And a lot of it is desolate area. And so you have a lot of animals that you wouldn't have necessarily in a city or a more populated area. And it's a national park, so I mean, we're protecting the life that's there. And there's a lot of people that go there And it's not just during the summertime. I mean, it's the fall time, not necessarily the winter because winter is gross.
Hmm.
But I mean, there's a lot of people there, and they're all over doing their own thing. They're going on the main trails, they're going on the other trails. So, I mean, it is a little curious, but I mean, it's not unheard of, I guess.
And it at least makes sense why it maybe presents more questions than answers on where
Yeah,
he was found, how he was found, and
yeah.
even trying to connect those dots.
I guess what I find curious about it is that so he must have fallen, let's say sometime in 2019. I mean, he couldn't have survived for years out there without contacting anybody or coming into any other soul. Is that his body, and then you said his belongings were near him?
Yeah, I imagine it was probably a phone. A list of what was found around his remains has not been released.
Which makes sense, because the case is still open.
No, the case is closed.
I wonder why they haven't released it. That's curious. Because
It
usually
does
if
say,
it's closed.
yeah, I do remember reading that. So the remains were found, and before the scientific process could go through of the DNA confirmation, it was released that family members identified his belongings. So I would imagine it would be at least a phone. Um, Jumping back to talking about he probably fell in 2019,
Mhm.
all of the people that surrounded Chase, his friends, his family, when they described him, what kept coming up is that he was an excited new father. So
Mhm.
that kind of leads me to believe it was when he left that evening, the accident probably happened fairly shortly after that. He
Mhm.
had an infant son, so I can't imagine he disappeared to blow off steam and just kind of went off the grid for a little bit
Mhm.
because he had that baby.
Yeah.
And he was just in town visiting. It's not like he was near his home.
So how far away from where he was staying in town to Scott's from where he was found? What's the distance we're talking here? Like mile? 3 miles?
From the surveillance of where he was seen, I think at that convenience store, it was 3 to 5 miles from that location. That was all within the same area of her grandparents' home,
So how far was the convenience store from the grandparents' home?
Gering, Nebraska.
I mean, to walk 3 to 5 miles, you have to, right, you would either have to be in shape or it would have had to have been a pretty hefty argument. Like, I'm not the most in shape gal, but if I have some like anger or whatever emotion that's pushing me that day, like, I can walk for quite a while. But I have to have some fuel behind me. I'm not going to just wake up one morning where I'm happy and I'm like, let's go walk 3 to 5 miles. Let's go, ladies. You know?
Well, it does say that her grandparents' house was actually in the Terrytown area, which is right
Okay.
there in the Gering vicinity within
Hmm.
a mile or two. So
Okay.
puts it at approximately 8 miles would probably have been his walking route. Putting myself in the mindset
Yeah.
of him that evening, I mean, it seems that there was a lot of tension between him and Bailey and him and
Mhm.
Bailey's family. You're in a town that you don't live in. You are surrounded by family that isn't necessarily your own. You're in
Yeah.
a transition period. So Banks at this point was only, I think, less than 2 months older, right at the 2 month mark.
Wow, he was a
He's a new
baby
parent,
baby.
as is Bailey. They're trying to navigate that. So trying to think of like being able to walk that much or
Mhm.
walk that far in the dark in an unfamiliar area maybe isn't that unlikely because this was kind of in character for him to just kind of leave and blow off some steam. It's the
Right.
middle of summer. Weather might have been beautiful.
Yeah, I just think that, definitely he's going to have some fuel that's pushing him
Hmm.
to go this distance, right? So, but I guess the thing is that how does he end up in the park, in the National Monument area, right? And once he gets there, I don't know.
When his remains were found, in
Hmm.
reading through a lot of people's comments on it, people that are local to that area,
Yeah.
these walking paths aren't necessarily ones that you would get on in the dark, even if you're familiar with the area, just given the terrain, it
Right.
being the buttes and the cliffs all over the place.
Hmm.
So when it was released where his remains were actually located, like I said, it it brought up many, many more questions,
It raised a
which
couple red flags. I guess that was going to be my question. It's dark outside, right? Because it was nighttime. And how do you get into the park? It's closed. Obviously, if you're walking, you can jump a fence, right?
yeah,
But how am I finding? Where am I going? Do I have
yeah.
a flashlight? You know.
I
Um,
mean, he had his phone.
True. I wonder. Obviously, if they haven't released the belongings, we haven't seen a transcript of the phone. How long was it on for? Was he messaging? Did he make any other calls? Anything along those lines? And we don't know what they were arguing about.
No, I don't know that that was ever fully released. I've
Okay.
seen people speculating about it, putting their input in on it, but
Mhm.
I don't see anywhere that Bailey actually came out and released what they were discussing. With that being said, even moving back to when he first disappeared, a lot of people were looking at Bailey and her family with a lot of questions.
What has Chance's family said, if anything? Have they made any comment on this?
Chance's mom, Dawn,
Mhm.
actually runs a Facebook page
Mhm.
that for years it was named Finding Chance.
Yeah.
It actually has like 66,000 people on it. And since he has been found and the case has been closed, I believe the like the page name has changed to Helping Chance.
Yeah.
And within that page, she's always been very active. She
Mhm.
has been a warrior in keeping her son's case open and alive
Wow.
and eyes on it. At this point, because of the scrutiny that Bailey and her family were getting at this time, Bailey and Chance's parents, I think they probably fell out of touch, which is disappointing because that probably means that Chance's son also lost
Mhm.
connection with maybe some grandparents. I
Mhm.
do know that with some of the posting that Dawn has done on that Facebook page, she is very disappointed with the resolution of the case being closed. She had made a comment that she actually has more questions than answers at this point. And
Wow.
circling back to the scrutiny that Bailey was receiving, where it all started is very shortly after Chance went missing.
Mhm.
There were reportings that Bailey had inquired about obtaining a death certificate very shortly after he disappeared. Some
Oh,
accounts place it like within days of him going missing. This raised suspicion from Chance's family members.
how could it not? I mean, was she wanting the death certificate for the, I'm assuming, a pension, a policy, something of that nature?
Yes, it actually came out that that was not the case. She was not necessarily inquiring about a death certificate, but Bailey did come out and explain that she was trying to understand what options she had because Chance was missing and he was the sole provider for their family. So she was trying to figure out what path forward she had for her and her newborn son.
Now, we could be getting this out of context. We don't know what she asked specifically, but
Hmm.
it seems rather odd, if my husband goes missing, there is no way you're going to tell me that he is dead until I see his body. Like, I'm going to be out looking for the man. Like, yeah, I might be like, okay, if this is a possibility, what happens, right? But
Hmm.
I'm going to be like, doesn't matter because he's coming back, you know?
With this case gaining the national spotlight that it did very early on, obviously that brings in the internet and people online with their questions and their opinions.
Yes.
But it was noted that Bailey, as his wife, was very quiet
Hmm.
as compared to Chance's mother and Chance's family and his closest friends. So, like I said, Dawn had this Facebook page going. Bailey and her family stayed very silent on the matter. I shouldn't say very silent in comparison to how
Right. They
Chance's
just weren't
family.
as vocal.
Yes.
Now,
Um,
was that in character for Bailey? Like, was she somebody who was a little bit more reserved, just, really wasn't vocal about things, or was this kind of maybe a little bit more out of character for her?
I didn't find anything saying that that was out of character for her.
Huh.
There's not a lot on Bailey and her personal life, especially since the accident. They are from rural towns. She wasn't a big public figure by any means, so
Right.
it's really just speculation from people online and on how they have kind of put her personality together with
I
the rest
guess
of them.
I would be curious because, typically what we see is that the friends, right? The couple friends. So if something were to happen, me or you, right? They're going to ask us, like, what was Caitlin like? What was Sydney like?
Mhm.
And I'm going to be like, something's not right,
Mhm.
right? Like something's off. So do we have like friends that are saying anything along those lines? Is nobody thinking this is weird in his family? They're like friendship? Because think about that. If something happened to Brady, for instance, right? And you were tore up from the floor up about it, and they were asking questions. I'm like, no, like this is how she would act. Like this is very, she's acting in accordance with her personality. But if you were acting off, I'd be like, oh no, this is not this is Galen at all. Like I don't know who this creature is.
And be loud about it, not just little comments here and there.
Right,
Make it.
exactly. There would be
Yeah,
comments.
no, there's actually no reports saying that what she's doing is out of character.
Okay.
Everything really comes from like Reddit and YouTube, people
Hmm.
speculating, commenting on her limited like media appearances, her tone in some of the interviews. But like I said, she's from small town Nebraska or Wyoming.
She's from this area.
Yeah, to say that that alone would raise red flags, I
Yeah,
wouldn't feel comfortable saying that.
I agree. I agree. Typically, people from this area, just so everybody's aware, they're going to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved. It's very salt of the earth where we live. That's what we're doing. And we live with animals and we live with nature. It's not the hustle and hubbub. There's not like this social elite group and all these other things in the hierarchy structures. It's just you're living. You're just basic living.
Yes, I think where people really started comparing was how Chance's family was handling it, such as Dawn, his mother, versus his wife, Bailey,
Right. Which makes sense.
is very, very different how they handled the cases. I was not able to find any information on if Dawn and the rest of Chance's family have been able to stay connected with Banks,
Hmm.
Chance's little boy. That has all been very quiet. I do really hope that they've been able to maintain a relationship over the
Yeah.
years, especially since Banks is now growing up without his father.
Yeah. He's going to need all of the love and support surrounding him. Okay, so one of the questions that I had is so, what are some of the theories that people are kind of putting together and
So
saying has
some of
happened, supposedly?
one of the bigger theories that I have seen over years and that has
Mhm.
been pretty consistent, this is all alleged, this is not our beliefs, this is just what I've been reading online, is that Bailey and her family had something to do with it because of the tension that was happening. It does sound like Chance and Bailey, their relationship, it has been described as it was very normal for them to have big arguments like that. That was kind of the norm for
Yeah.
them being around where Bailey's family was. Many people do believe that something happened within an argument between Bailey and Chance or Bailey's father and Chance,
Got it.
and it was covered up. Again, all speculation.
Allegedly.
The other theory that I had seen is that with him walking in the dark in a desolate area. When I say desolate, more so small town. It's not the big city. There's not tons of traffic coming through there.
Hmm.
Maybe he was picked up by somebody on the road. Uh, Something nefarious happened there.
Right.
I went back yesterday and was trying to read through a lot of the Facebook page stuff because that's where I've obviously been following the case. And
Mm.
within the comments, that's where a ton of information was. But since a lot of it has been deleted.
Now, the other question that I have is that obviously, since the remains when they were found were fairly decomposed, it's kind of hard to do like toxicology reports and things of that nature because if we're dealing with bones, it's a little bit of a different process. Were they able to do any type of testing on the remains, or they just saw it and they were like, "It fell from a cliff"?
I think just from the testing that they were able to do, they were able to determine that the fall was from a significant height, was all.
Okay. And where he was found, was there you said there was an actual like cliff that was there.
So, an actual close up photo of where he was found hasn't been released, but the description of the walking path along that way would lead people to believe that it would be right off of one of the buttes in that area.
Got it. Okay. I think that anytime anybody dies, it's really hard to process. It's really hard to grieve. And when you have a situation like this where there's so many answers you feel aren't answered, right? When we watch true crime, immediately when we hear that somebody had an argument with somebody, that was the last person to see them. And it was their significant other. Odds
Yeah.
are they probably had something to do with it. And so we're kind of wired that way that we think about it. So I can absolutely understand why Don and a lot of other people believe that there might have been something to do with this. But to be honest, when we look at it and we talk about it, walking that far, if you're a fairly fit individual and you're going through it and you have a tumultuous relationship and this is something that you're dealing with all the time, then you add in a newborn, which is, I'm sure you can attest to, quite stressful. And if you're already on a rocky relationship already, I can't imagine how much more stressful that must be. And then you go for this walk to really soothe yourself, to kind of gather your thoughts. All of a sudden, you end up in an area, maybe you don't know where you are. You thought you were going this way, you're going that way. It's dark. You trip, you fall, or you take the wrong step. Boom, you're gone, right? And I think that's something really difficult for somebody to process and digest, especially a mother. I can't imagine what that must feel like, and to not have that answer and to know specifically what happened at the moment he left this plane and how that happened. You would be grasping at straws, I feel like, to just find any answer, even though it's not going to bring him back. It gives you something, you know.
Yeah. So the part of the monument that he was actually found on was the north side, which it is a little bit less traveled, which
Mm-hmm.
could maybe explain why it took so long to find him.
Mm-hmm.
But again, anytime you lose a loved one and in such a heartbreaking way, to not have every answer, not have every question you have answered
Mm-hmm.
would keep you awake at night. I couldn't imagine how Dawn navigates her day to day. Just it impresses me how much time and effort she just put in endlessly until her
Mm-hmm.
son was found.
Absolutely. I mean, you always kind of want to know how anybody you love passes. It helps with that grieving process. So for her, I'm sure it's got to be very similar.
And I did try and put myself in her shoes as well. When it comes to Bailey's perspective, just because she handled it different
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean she did anything wrong.
Hmm.
Putting myself in the shoes of Bailey, if that were to happen to Brady, would I be devastated? Yes. Would I do everything in my power to find him? Yes. At the end of the day, I still have two kids to take care of, to keep my mind healthy for.
Yes.
Is that maybe how she handled it? Who knows?
Right.
I'm sure the people closest to her could answer that, but I would like to think that that is why she stayed quiet and a little
Hmm.
bit more secluded from the case, because she had to, at the same time, take care of her son.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up an excellent point because Dawn's got super vocal. She's out there, right? Whereas Bailey's a little bit more reserved. People grieve differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all humans, we all experience things different. And so she might just be a person that's just, just an introvert. Maybe she's just more quiet naturally and she doesn't really talk about things. And then speaking of the area, a lot of times there's not a lot of emotional processing that occurs, right? It is what it is. And so she might just be that individual that doesn't experience things like that.
I will say, if I were in that position and God forbid something like that happens to my family and I'm not handling it in a way that the public would say is the right way of handling it,
Right.
I look at a lot of the attacks and the theories and the speculation. I look at everything that Bailey's family has gone through
Mm-hmm.
with this case being so much in the public eye, and I couldn't imagine if at the end of the day they are 100% innocent in this. They had nothing to do with it, and they are grieving just as much as everybody else. I couldn't imagine having so many people wish so much harm on me and my family, the way that they have been attacked.
Wow.
It is,
Absolutely. I think that'd be so difficult.
it's also heartbreaking at the end of the day. Bank lost his dad.
Yeah.
Dawn and her family lost their son and brother, and Bailey lost her husband.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they have closure. They have found his remains.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate that there are so many questions still left unanswered, but at very least, they can move on with a part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Chance's story really does resonate strongly in South Dakota because he was the Black Hills native. He was the ranch kid. He was part of the rodeo community and part of the rodeo culture. And his disappearance really affected many people throughout Western South Dakota, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And I think that's because he really represented a type of lifestyle that we live, with it just being the small town, tight-knit community life that we all lead.
He was that South Dakota guy.
He was.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Not Our Business podcast. This case was local to us, and we just wanted to bring more awareness and light to Chance Engelbert's story. Chance was loved by so many people, and we hope that sharing his story really helps to keep his memory alive. Follow along with us as we continue diving into true crime, history, conspiracy theories, and self-discovery topics. You can find all of our episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok for new episode alerts, behind-the-scenes content, and updates about what we'll be covering next. And again, we thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.